Welcome back to my channel. In today's tutorial, we're going to be creating another tumbler, and of course, because it is Black History Month, I thought it was only fitting for me to put together this gorgeous Black History Month inspired tumbler design. I found all of the images that I'm using for today on Creative Fabrica's website, and you guys know that I will list all the additional supplies down in the description box, where you'll even find some discount codes and of course other ways that you can follow me on social media. So let's go ahead and jump right into today's tutorial. All right, so I am starting with a 20-ounce tumbler. That was a previous design that I did not care for, and unfortunately right now I'm actually out of black spray paint, so I decided that for base painting this cup particularly, we'd use an acrylic paint as a base paint. So this is black 3.0. It's supposed to be like the darkest black paint ever. This is not necessary for you to recreate this tutorial. I'm going to start by that. This is a very expensive black paint that I've had for a really long time, and I clearly need to use the rest of it because there isn't much left, but any black acrylic paint will certainly work to just base paint your cup if you've run out of spray paint, much like I have. So I'm just going to do a couple layers of this paint here, and I really do like how this paint dries. It dries with like a really pretty matte finish, but you do have to do multiple coats of this paint in order to get kind of a streakless look, if you know what I mean. So I'm just going to do a nice layer of this paint. I'm just going to apply one coat here on camera, and then I put another two thin coats over top of this first coat that I have here, drying each layer in between to make sure I get it thoroughly dried before I go ahead and add the second and third coats of this same paint here. This paint doesn't take very long to dry, very similar to regular acrylic paint, but I did use my heat gun to speed up the process just so that I could get this kind of base painted and ready for us to move on to the next part. So now that my cup is base painted, you can see it's that beautiful matte black that I was talking about. I'm going to take some of this washi tape, which is kind of similar to like my painter's tape. It's not a very sticky masking or washi tape, if that makes sense. It's kind of more of like a tape that you'd use to kind of mark things off for designs. So I'm taking this tape and using it in place of my painter's tape because it's less sticky than my blue painter's tape, and I'm just going to sort of eyeball the bottom here to kind of decide where the center line of this is. So we're doing a split cup design, which you guys have seen me do plenty of tutorials on my channel. So I'm just kind of deciding where the halfway point of the bottom is and then making sure I have a straight line on either side of the cup with that washi tape. I now have a white colored pencil that I'm going to use to help draw my design on one half of this cup. So for this design, I'm doing kind of a hand painted floral design. So I'm going to use the white crayon here, or the white colored pencil here, in order to kind of sketch out the design that I am thinking of and get those kind of petals of the flowers that I'm creating on here kind of placed so that I don't go into painting my design on here kind of blindly. So I'm going to start by telling you guys, I am not a painter by any means. I can get myself by, but I am not a painter by any means. So sketching is always the best way for me to sort of have like a landscape and sort of like a stencil drawing, if you will, of what the approach to a cup is going to be, if there's going to be something of an element that's going to be mostly hand painted with paint. So once I've gotten kind of that half floral section done, I'm going to do the same and create a few petals in the center of a flower down at this bottom corner. So really I wanted these flowers to be really large, and the reason why I wanted them to be kind of large and take up most of this section is because when I get into smaller flowers and details, it's not my strong suit painting. So having them kind of large and kind of close up and zoomed in, I'm going to have a little bit more forgiveness, if you will, in the design when I go to paint it, and so it's not going to kind of look lopsided or weird if I tried to paint all of the petals on the flower on the cup. So once I'm pretty satisfied with my sketched out design, I'm then going to go ahead and get my paints ready so that we can paint this. So now we're going to get our paint set up and ready here. So I'm going to be using a combination of chalk paint as well as some Arteza paints and some regular acrylic paints that you can pick up from Walmart. I'll list all the colors that I'm using down in the description box, but the base of all of my paint is going to be this white chalk paint that I picked up from Walmart. And the reason why I'm using the white chalk paint is because acrylic paint tends to be a little bit more transparent, and I didn't want to have to do so many layers of paint on top of my hand painted design because I didn't want it to look streaky or clumpy and thick. So I figured having my chalk paint, which is really opaque and really going to give me really great color, would be a great base to use in order to mix my acrylic paint colors with and give me just a little bit more opacity when it comes to painting onto my floral design on the cup. So in each of the cups, I'm just putting a couple drops and adjusting it as I feel need. So I'm using two Arteza paints. This is a violet purple, and then I have a rose pink that I'm also going to use and put in another one of the cups here. And so I wanted kind of a light look, a light colored look, but I didn't want it to be too light that it looked pastel, if that makes sense. So, and the reason why I'm using these floral designs is because it really is something to match the design that we're putting on the front of this cup. So I wanted to try and pull in as many of those colors and elements from the SVG and PNG file we're going to be using for the front of the cup to the back side of the cup in this split design look. So I'm just going to continue to mix up my different acrylic paints in my batches of chalk paint. For this pink here, I did start with a pale pink and thought that that would be a good pink to use, but it was a little bit too light for my liking with the white chalk paint. And so I went back and grabbed a hot pink color called Diva Pink from Apple Barrel. You can pick this up at Walmart, and put that in the batch there to darken this up a bit. So I'm just going to make those up, and then the final color, I'm just adding a light blue that I have. I'm adding quite a bit of this blue too to really get it to be the true color blue that I'm looking for. We don't need a whole lot of the blue, but I wanted to make sure that it was apparent that the color is blue and that it didn't come off looking white. So with these all mixed up, now we're going to get into hand painting. So I have a batch of new brushes that I'm using. They're like the pointed tip brushes, and these were really helpful. I know that they are good brushes to use for people who do actually paint and make flowers. So I happen to have these and thought these would be really great to use. And so I'm starting with that light pink that I have, that I've mixed the Diva Pink in with the white chalk paint, and we're just sort of doing the base layer here of the petals. So I'm working one petal at a time because, again, I'm following the picture of the PNG file we're using on the flip side to try and mimic some of those flower petals. Even though it's not the exact match, I want to try and mimic as much of that flower and those flowers that are part of that file as possible to make it look like it's a very cohesive design and look. So I'm doing a couple layers of paint with the light pink, and then you're going to see me go in with that purple that we've mixed with the white chalk paint. And that is just going to kind of be the center of the flower, if that makes sense. So off camera here, I'm just pulling up that design so that I can see it on my iPad. That way I can try and mimic that to the best of my ability while I'm hand painting this. So after my layer of pink on that petal, I'm then going to go ahead and switch to that purple like I mentioned, and we're just going to kind of do like this pulling method and just kind of do like different like streaks and lines to just kind of mimic like the center portion of the flower. So the flowers that are part of this design don't really have like a true center, if that makes sense. Like it's super dark in the center, but it doesn't have your typical like, you know, sunflower look where there's like a circular center design and then the flower petals come outward. It's kind of more of like a dark center, sort of like a deep looking flower, and then the flower petals come out of that. So I'm trying to recreate that as best as I can. I definitely think that with more practice, you could really nail a floral design. Again, flowers are not my strong suit, which is why in a lot of my tutorials, you guys will see me, you know, pull different SVGs or PNG files that I can just do print and cut designs with, because hand painting, when it comes to like recreating flowers in a hand painted style, is definitely not my strong suit and probably something that I would love to spend more time practicing. So I'm just taking the lighter pink to do a little bit more of an accent here. You're going to watch a speed session here because it would take really long for me to kind of go through this process to show you kind of in real time. But I'm kind of just going back and forth and mimicking exactly what I did with that first petal there and just mimicking that for all of the others. You are going to see that I do go back and I touch up the original flower because I realized that it's not dark enough in the center. So I decided to put the rose pink and the violet purple that I used to mix into my chalk paint. I decided to put those just down first, like on my paper here, and use those to create a little bit more darkness and just a little bit more dimension and depth to the flower itself, because I felt like it was starting to look a little bit flat here with the colors being so kind of along the same gradient and shade level, if that makes sense. So I went back with the deep purple and really went in that center, kind of still keeping that lighter purple present, but kind of making that represent kind of the depth and darkness of the center portion of the flower. I then took the rose color and went along my highlighted sections that I created along some of the petals to just, again, add a little bit more dimension so it doesn't look like a flat 2D flower on my cup. Again, I am no expert. If you are looking for a full artist tutorial on how to paint something, I'm definitely not the person, but I do think it's worth trying your hand at hand painting florals. I mean, you're definitely not going to know how good you are of a painter right until you start somewhere. So after I'm kind of satisfied for the most part with that flower, I'll then go ahead and move to the other flower, which is in the opposite corner. I did also pull this flower to the bottom section of the cup as well, because I just thought it made sense to kind of pull it over the edge of that to just really complete the design. So I didn't show you me putting the dots on there. I just used the blue paint to just put a few dots as sort of like accents to represent like this beautiful blue, like aura that the SVG PNG has. And then after that was dry, I took off that tape that lined it all up. Then I put this on the turner for 2 coats of epoxy. I'm using my KS Resin Liquidy Split, and then after that was fully dry, I am now onto the sanding portion. Since this is only paint, it really did not require much sanding. Most of the sanding was just at that top edge to again start and create that fine line of stainless steel so that I can move on to the other pieces of this design. So now that the sanding is done and I've cleaned up my cup, I'm going to take some painter's tape and just again separate that line here because we're going to be using a combination of glitter and mica powders, and I want to make sure I can keep the painted side as beautiful and as bright as it is and not make sure that any of that contaminates. So we're using some mica powders from Vinyl Gallery, their 4K glitter line. I have a violet, I have a rosy red, and then peacock blue. And then we're going to be using 3 glitter colors as well. It's You Had Me at Aloha, Violet Rainbow, and Glitter at the Disco. So those are my Aisha Creations glitter, and I will link those down in the description box. But we're going to start with the mica powders first. And the way that I'm going to apply my mica powders is by using Tack It. So I'm taking my Tack It over and over glue, and I'm just putting a nice layer of that onto my cup here. And I'm just going to spread that around with my brush here, making sure I get a nice even coat and even layer of that glue all the way across the cup. So I'm using Tack It because I feel like that's the easiest way for me to apply mica if I'm not going to do it on a turner or mixed in with epoxy, if that makes sense. And because I also want to add glitter, it just made sense for me to do this kind of all in one shot versus having to do multiple layers of unnecessary coats of epoxy. So I'm speeding up the process of getting that glue to dry with my heat gun. And now we're going to go ahead and open up the mica powders and get started with kind of doing a nice dusting on the tumbler on this back side. So for this side of the tumbler, I didn't really have a true vision or thought process as to what I wanted this to look like. I just wanted there to be kind of like almost like a galaxy style like look and view around the PNG file that we're using as our main decal for this cup. And so I just kind of started taking paintbrushes and just went with it. I started with like some streaks and lines, and then you'll see me like do a lot of dotting kind of in the center here. At this point, although I knew what the file I'd be using and decal would be on here, I didn't know how large or how small this decal was going to be and how I was going to have it cut as far as size wise. So I'm kind of just making sure to cover up a good portion of this back side so that you can still see, regardless of how large the PNG file is cut, you can still see a lot of the mica and glitter around the image, if that makes sense. So after I've gone in with my streaks, you're going to see me take a clean brush, a clean, like really soft brush, and that's going to help me blend all of these micas into the glue that's underneath. It's also going to brush off any of the excess mica that may be on the cup that we don't necessarily need, just like we would with glitter. So I'm just going to kind of brush that in and kind of burnish that in a little bit. And now I'm going back in to fill in some of the darker spots here to kind of just give more of the mica look on top of this before I feel like I'm satisfied. Again, I wouldn't say there's a real technique to this. I kind of just loved these 3 mica powders and they went really well with the designs and the colors that I was already using. And so I just kind of went at it at this side of the cup. But mica powders are really so much fun to use. You can use them to make Northern Lights tumblers. They're great when you're adding them to epoxy and creating like a galaxy style Milky Way. So there's a lot of fun ways and reasons to use mica powders. And this is just one of those ways that you can use them. So I'm pretty satisfied with how the mica powder side is looking. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up, and then we're going to add glitter to this same side that we've added our mica powder. So for adding glitter, we're going to go back to Mod Podge, and so I've gotten a brand new brush, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a nice coat of Mod Podge over the back side here. I am putting on a little bit more of a thicker coat of glue here because the 3 glitters that I'm using for Lysha Creations are chunky glitters, and so I want to make sure that I get them to stick and that most of the glitter doesn't end up rolling off, if that makes sense. With these 3 colors, I really just was looking to do like a little bit of a dusting of all 3 of the colors just to bring in that really holographic galaxy vibe and look I'm thinking for this side. And so I am kind of holding my cup really close to my paper, but I'm holding my shaker bottle pretty high up, probably about maybe a foot from my cup, just so that when the glitter sprinkles, it kind of spreads out and kind of more of a fan and not so much like a huge dollop of glitter in one section, if that makes sense. You also could just pour a little bit of glitter onto your paper, which you guys have seen me do before, and just use your fingers to sprinkle in different sections if that's easier for you. I wasn't sure how much glitter I was going to go for, so I kind of just went for it, if that makes sense. So once I'm pretty satisfied with the amount of glitter that I have on here, I'm going to set this aside and let the Mod Podge completely dry. I then am going to take this outside and spray seal this one side with clear gloss spray paint to make sure that my glitter stays put and doesn't migrate to the other side. And then I will put another coat of epoxy on that after I am kind of done with this. So before we can get this cup onto the turner for its coats of epoxy before our decal, I am going to do a little bit of outlining of the flowers on the hand painted floral side. So you could do what I just said and take it to the turner, put a coat of epoxy on, and then come back to this. But since I had already let it dry and I've already sprayed seal it, and I really was pretty confident that the glitter would stay put, I decided to go ahead and do the hand painted or the tracing of the floral design on the back side now. That way I didn't have to, again, wait another few hours before I could touch the cup again. So I'm using a black acrylic paint pen, which you guys have seen me use in plenty of tutorials. This is a Craft Smart pen, and then I have a thicker one that I'm going to use to kind of go over it, which is a little bit darker and comes out and bleeds a little bit more, if that makes sense. But I like to use this thinner one first to kind of really get my outline down before I go in with like the heavier and darker one to kind of trace over the lines that I've created here. So I'm really very simply just tracing the petals, putting a few accent lines and accent marks in there in the center to just kind of make it look more like a flower, if that makes sense. So I did a tutorial forever ago. It was a tutorial from Susanna Renaud. It's her floral leopard design. So in that, you guys have seen me outline like watercolor flowers and stuff. And so that's basically what we're doing here. We're just creating like these different accents and things to really pull out and showcase that it is a flower or a floral design. And that's just going to make the hand painted side just kind of pop that much more. So once I've gotten all of the initial line work done here, I then will go back with a darker kind of thicker black acrylic paint pen to go over all of the same lines that I've just drawn. That again is really just going to tie everything together, if that makes sense. So I hope this is making sense. I know this is probably a little bit longer and not as long as I probably need to make it, but I felt like I really wanted to spend time kind of talking about this process because it's not something that I am really skilled at. This is newer for me as far as when it comes to hand painted florals and things like that. So I wanted to make sure I was doing a good job of explaining my process. So once I'm done with that, this cup goes back on the turner for 2 coats of epoxy. And so now I'm going to cut out this design here. I did find this design on Creative Fabrica. It came with a lot of beautiful images, and I had a really hard time deciding which of the ones I was going to go with when I finally landed on this one. But I am going to go ahead and get this cut out. I cut it or printed it 6 inches wide so that it was large enough to fit on the back side of that cup. So now, after my cup has come back off the turner, I'm going to finish up this cup with just the final work that I need to do, which is to add the purple washi tape to separate the split design of the cup, and then to add the PNG file that I printed on printable sticker paper. This is my koala paper that I used for my Freshie tutorial a few months ago. It's the same sticker paper. I absolutely love this because I don't have to seal it either, which makes sense, but you certainly could use water slide if you wanted to as well, or a glossy paper as well if you didn't want to or didn't have matte sticker paper. So now it's time to apply this decal or this PNG file to the mica powder and glitter side. And so I'm literally just going to peel and stick. I actually had to cut this file twice or print this file twice because the first time I got a lot of wrinkling and a lot of like cracking in it, and then I tried to pull it up to fix it and it just ruined it because it's not very forgiving when it comes to that. So definitely be mindful of that. I think to save myself, I probably should have sized this down a little bit and kind of decreased the size that I had it at, because this is on a 20 ounce, so it has that weird curve. And so having a larger decal sometimes can cause a little bit of headache, if you will, when you're trying to apply it to a smaller cup like this. So I was able to get the decal applied there, and now that this looks good, I am gonna go ahead and put this back on the turner, and in my 2 final coats of epoxy, I'm gonna add a little bit of Diamond Magic to my coats of epoxy, and then this was done. Let's go ahead and take a look at the final results. So this is how this cup turned out. I really do love this kind of unique and different design. I wanted to do something a little bit different for Black History Month. I'm so used to seeing like the red, yellow, and green, which I think is great, but I love to be a little bit different, and I love colors and vibrancy. So I really loved stumbling upon these, and I really love how this came out. So I do hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. Of course, if you did, be sure to leave me any comments and questions down below. And of course, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!